Ms. White, in regard to the contingency, we put 600,000 in there. We didn't touch that, did we? This year?
No, that is part of our fund balance carryover.
So then the other additional 500 is coming from the Mill Creek insurance.
Yes.
But we're not putting 1.1 million in there.
No.
My question is, and I know it's relatively the same monies, but from a policy standpoint, if we put 600,000 in contingency and we need a contingency fund and we didn't touch it, why don't we just leave it in there? And then the 500,000 that comes from Mill Creek, we use that from a policy standpoint, how we see fit in this project. If you need it to balance the budget, then so be it, since it was funds that we had to spend out to begin with. I guess from a philosophical standpoint, if we were able to come up with the funds last year to put in contingency and we didn't have to use them, then let's leave them there. And then those insurance dollars, and granted, you can make the argument that they're both discretionary funds, but again, from a policy standpoint or philosophy standpoint, that's kind of where I would like to see us go. So we're end result is we took the 600 out and we only put 500 back in, and it's
From a fiscal standpoint, or it could be the board would like to leave that in there, they can, and you can direct us to do that. From a fiscal standpoint, that contingency fund rolls off into the general fund at closeout.
no, that's understood, but
And that's why
the
I was showing it
auditors-
that way.
In the auditor's books, it does that, but in our books, it's still that same balance. In terms of the vehicle replacement fund being suspended, what's the impact going to be from that?
The vehicle replacement fund was basically an overall $445,925 impact. There are some costs. What we're basically doing is not charging the departments for fiscal year 2008-09 for vehicle replacement.
They're not driving.
Excuse me?
They're still driving the vehicles, so what's the
Yes,
impact?
there's some maintenance costs, there's some money available that can be charged in the garage budget and we've left $30,000 for vehicle maintenance in this budget 0711 for fiscal year 0809, which can be charged out for some maintenance if needed. But the actual purchases of vehicles, the charges for purchases of vehicles has been suspended.
How do you see that impacting this county system if we're not putting aside those funds for replacement vehicles? The vehicles are still being used, and we've only budgeted $30,000 for repair and maintenance countywide?
Well, there's
I almost spent that on my pickup.
there
this
is
week,
some
so-
funding in the garage budget. It may be buildings and grounds, I'm not sure. One of the budgets that is specifically for maintenance of vehicles. I believe it's the garage budget.
I'm a little concerned about the suspension of that program. We put that program in place a number of years ago for a specific reason, and it's worked out well, and I understand our constraints, but I remain concerned about suspension of that program. And I also know we went through and we've offset some of the pool cars, and by fleet reduction, that's helped considerably. And with one of our local vendors in terms of rental cars, it makes us a deal that we can't drive our own cars for. That's a great program. And we've worked on those policies. But we went through a number of years ago, previous board, and developed these reserve policies, and I hate to see those without a real good review of those impacts, those suspended.
I could just say, this is one of the budget balancing mechanisms, and to the extent that we don't realize savings in this, then cuts have to be made elsewhere in the budget. So that's a consideration here, and the recommendation comes forward because of the sense that there isn't someplace else in the budget that nearly $500,000 could be found. And the feeling is a one-year suspension will mean that some cars are in service a little bit longer than they would be otherwise, but that overall it would not be a major impact to the county system. This strategy has been used before in the past. I would not recommend doing it multiple years in a row, but I think for 1 year it seemed like a reasonable strategy to save nearly $500,000. So that's how
I just don't
it
want to
fits
see
in.
it come back and bite us in the foot later by not getting it ample funds there.
Right. We have continued to budget funds for maintenance and the ongoing costs of cars, so
What about the departments that aren't completely general fund funded and their contributions to the replacement fund? So I know of one or two that have a substantial number of vehicles that get their funding from other sources.
they don't use the vehicle replacement fund in the same way because they can't pay outside revenues into a general pool. Essentially, their funds have to kind of go back to them specifically for their vehicles. So it doesn't apply to them in the same way.
Okay, thank you.
And, I was going to say on the contingency issue, if the funds are left in contingency, then it means it's not in the fund balance, which again means that we have to cut someplace else.
Understood,
Okay.
but we got lucky by not having to use that this year, but we've had years where we haven't had that safety
Right.
net, and it's not an easy thing to go through a year without having some cushion.
Right, and the other thing to remember is the 600,000 was 100,000 of general fund and 500,000 of a deferred teeter payment. So part of that was also making good on that payment. So it really wasn't 600,000 of general fund money.
Thank you.
Supervisor
Yeah,
Pinchas?
Mr. Chairman, the contingency is something that you plan on using through the year. For the members of the public, I believe we have a general fund reserve of 2.1 million, isn't that right, Meredith? 1.9, yeah. So that's separate in your contingency fund, which we haven't tapped into in the last few years.
Okay.
And we should be building that to a level of at least 3%, which we haven't, but it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick.
Okay.
Just wanna bring that up.
Okay. So moving on back down to the Justice Departments. The child support budget unit 2090. This year has a general fund contribution due to A87 costs, and normally it's a negative net county cost, but because the 87 costs are 2 years back, this is basically the costs have decreased, and now the net county, there's a resulting net county cost contribution due to the fact of roll forward and adjusting cost in 87. Meredith could probably explain this a little bit clearer than I can. Okay, she just stated to me. The Child Support Services budget unit was basically overcharged in previous years for costs associated that have to do with the 87. Okay. The jail budget this year is being funded at status quo. Last year, if you look to column C, last year the net county cost final adopted for the jail was $9 million.